Welcome to the Herd in the Corridor podcast, a podcast about making sense of business within the U.S.-India corridor and beyond. I'm your host, Angela Chitkaran. The H-1B visa has long been a critical pathway for highly skilled professionals, particularly in the technology, healthcare, and research sectors. But with rising political scrutiny, fluctuating application numbers, and evolving global competition for talent, the program stands at a crossroads. The numbers tell a fascinating story. In fiscal year 2024, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services received a staggering 780,000 H-1B registrations, yet the application process remains highly competitive, with only 85,000 visas granted annually. Indian professionals continue to dominate, receiving over 72% of approved H-1B petitions. Meanwhile, the Optional Practical Training, or the OPT program, has grown with nearly 344,000 participants, highlighting the demand for skilled graduates in the U.S. workforce. But there's another side to the story. Critics argue that the system is flawed. Some say it depresses wages, while others claim it's riddled with abuse and inefficiencies. Meanwhile, the global race for top talent is heating up. So what's at stake? As we discuss the future of H-1B, we'll explore key questions such as, is the U.S. doing enough to attract and retain the world's brightest minds? How do politics and economic trends shape the program's future? And what reforms are needed to ensure that H-1B remains a driver of American innovation? To unpack these critical issues, we're joined by an incredible panel of experts. Immigration attorney Tamina Watson with Watson Immigration Law based in Seattle, former JPMorgan Chase Global Chief Economist and currently with Chan Economics, my dear friend, Dr. Anthony Chan. He joins us from New York. Also joining us is Managing Director of the Deevi Group and Adjunct Professor at Columbia Business School, Professor Kumar Deevi, based in New York. Returning a second time as co-host and contributor is Matthew Bishop, my old friend and former U.S. editor of the Economist Magazine and author of Philanthrocapitalism, How the Rich Can Save the World. He is currently visiting fellow at the Marshall Institute at the London School of Economics and a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institution. Matthew joins us from London. Welcome, everyone. How would you describe the current debate, Tamina? Recent discussions have highlighted the U.S. tech industry's reliance on H-1B visas to fill engineering roles, with figures like Elon Musk emphasizing a shortage of skilled domestic engineers. From a legal perspective, how does the H-1B program address these skill gaps, and what are these areas? Where do we fall short?
Well, Angela, thank you so much for bringing this topic up. I mean, it's such an important one. For background information, I am a practitioner. I'm working with on the ground with the businesses who need workers all the time. And, you know, these businesses are owned by U.S. citizens, American people, green card holders. These are people who are serving the American consumer. And whether it's tech or architecture or health, you name it, the H-1B visa is an important visa category in our immigration system. So what is the debate about? You know, about Christmas, people might remember this. There was this blowout debate that, you know, rocked the national conversation on H-1B visas. And there were debates on each side. You know, it's interesting to see how there is now a divide between the Republican Party, of some saying, yes, it's good, and some saying it's not. And it was surprising for immigration lawyers to actually witness this in real time, to see the tech industry leaders actually making it a national conversation in a way that we actually haven't seen before. And what was even more surprising is to see that the president actually backed Elon Musk in saying it's good for America. So where do we stand at the moment? I think it's a complex issue. We had seen laundry list of executive orders come out from day one. One of the executive orders we were expecting to see was called Buy American, Hire American. It was an executive order that was assigned during the first Trump administration that had a huge impact on H-1B visas and employment-based visas in general. We have not seen that yet. So admittedly, while the debate is still ongoing, although not quite front page news at the moment, it's interesting to see that we are in a wait and see situation yet. How our case is going to be adjudicated? Are we going to see extra scrutiny already? We're sort of bracing ourselves as immigration lawyers.
What are companies thinking about now? How are they bracing for whatever's to come?
It's tense. But what I have been saying to my clients is, if you've got a bona fide business and you have a bona fide job with a bona fide beneficiary who's going to be doing the job, you have nothing to worry about. We are on the straight and narrow, we're on the right side of the law. And if you have a business that has this requirement and you cannot find somebody else to do the job, which is part of the debate too, stay on track. And the registration period, you mentioned registration earlier, just for listeners who don't know this, there is, as Angela mentioned, there are 85,000 visas given out each year. It is a lottery system. The lottery happens around March every year. And if you get selected, only then do you have the privilege to file an application that could be scrutinized to death. But the lottery itself is happening around March, and we're just about preparing with our clients. And until changes come in, we're just going to charge ahead. And it's a circular problem, in my opinion. Part of the debate that you're hearing is, one side of the debate is, well, you're not hiring American workers. The trouble is that the education system is not producing enough workers to fill these positions. Yet countries like India, and India is an amazing example of making sure STEM is an integral part of the K-12 education system, where they're producing students who want to come to America to learn more. And, it's ironic, we have the best schools in the world. Professor Deevi, is obviously teaching at one of them. And we want to be able to keep the students here. If the immigration system does not keep up with the times that we are in, it doesn't serve the highest good of anyone.
Professor Nag, I'd like to go to you now. What are your thoughts having, one foot in the classroom and one foot in industry?
I would like to touch upon the broader spectrum of not just the Indians, but the Asian American community. When you mentioned about the 85,000 year-to-year H-1B visas, that is for across the globe, not just for Indian community. So if 1.5 billion Indian citizens and 1.5 Chinese citizens and the rest of the world, that's the combination of everyone would love to be on that H-1B category of employment opportunity applying for. So there's a fierce competition. This American dream is quite big that everybody wants to be on the board. The second aspect is the students across the world coming to the US education system, one of the best. I, for one, 29, 30 years back, I moved to the US on H-1B with my double master's in India, and I continues to have my education in the US. So having said that, it's so important to have the American education system which attracts a good talent across the world. That's over 300,000 across the American universities. But that particular category where students apply is only 20,000 plus. So having said that, the 85,000 plus 20,000, almost 105 visas that are eligible to apply are given to the students each year. You have millions backlog in the immigration process. So that takes 20 to 30 years to clear. Somebody who applied today for H-1B 2025, he or she will become a green card or a citizen from these two countries, very specific. by 2047 or 2050, or they never see that immigration. So I find that to be very challenging. So that needs to be addressed, I believe.
How has the American dream evolved, and is it still attainable?
Well, Angela, I think the American dream is still alive and still vibrant, but it is more challenging today. And I think Tamina said it best when she said that right now there is more demand for workers than we have available. I think it's very easy to start debating that maybe Americans are not smart enough to fill these jobs, and therefore we have to do these H-1B visas. I don't think it's that Americans are not smart enough. It's just that we don't have enough Americans that are qualified to do those jobs. And over time, we hope the educational system does put out more workers. But in economics, we have the law of comparative advantage when it comes to producing products. That means that we should allow countries that are more efficient and can produce products a lot cheaper to produce them, and we can just import them and raise everyone's standard of living. Same concept with workers. Why should we hire American workers if they don't have the skills that are necessary to fill those jobs when we can easily import them from other countries, whether it be China, where my father came from, or India, where my grandchildren are from. So we can do that. And I don't think it really should hurt anyone's feelings. And I was really encouraged when I heard some of the big high-tech individuals talking about the importance of the H-1B visa program. Yes, it's become politicized, but the reality is that there are a lot of jobs out there. There are many jobs for Americans, but there are also shortages that companies face. And there's no reason why we should not expand the H-1B visa program, let alone defend the H-1B visa program that we have today.
Has America been paying enough attention to the effects of globalization throughout the decades?
Yeah, I mean, I think America has a sort of confused position on immigration in general. It's a country built on immigrants pursuing the American dream, and it has, industries that are world class because of immigrants. It has many world class companies who that were founded by immigrants. I mean, and yet currently it has an administration that is particularly hostile to immigration, and where this debate that we're seeing at the moment about the H-1B visas goes to the heart of a very deep divide within the coalition of different groups that Trump has gathered together to form his administration. And so the degree of energy and hostility that was there between the Musk side and some of the MAGA base people like Steve Bannon and Miller, who are very anti-immigration, really is a fault line that is going to probably niggle away at this administration going through over the next 4 years. And obviously this has been building for a long time, and there's been a failure by successive administrations and Congresses to actually fix the immigration policy in a way that makes sense for the American economy. And the H-1B visa, because it goes for high-skilled people in particular, it's particularly absurd that America has limited it in the way that it has, because America's growth and productivity over the last 20, 30 years has been driven by industries that need the best labor in the world, and people want to come to America. So why on earth would you limit it? It's really holding back it's the growth potential that America has. And you'd probably also want to extend work visas to every foreign student in America that graduates. That's another policy idea that you hear thrown about, but it's crazy that you have the best universities in the world that bring all these foreigners into the country, and then you throw them out soon after they graduate when they would love to work in America. So it's a mess. America has this great position in the world. People want to come to it, and yet the visa system doesn't facilitate that in a way that it should do.
About the immigration point of view, I have a different take on this, especially in the classroom when I see whether it's the Harvard, Wharton, or Columbia or NYU. The talent that applies directly, it cannot directly apply to the companies. If Microsoft, Google, or even Tesla, when they wanted to hire the right candidates or the talent, best of the best, they'll go to the campus or they go to India, they go to China, and they hire directly. There's no filtration or a middleman in between. But the exploitation, what I see is several of these companies uses this H-1B mechanism, not developing the innovative ideas or the solution, just becomes as a talent source, a human capital. They are the ones who are exploiting the situation because their interest is only to provide employment to cash out. Rather, like Microsoft never complains about, I'm not finding any people. They'll go to Israel, they go to India, they go to China, they go to Vietnam or Syria to find the people. So in my view, immigration is kind of a double-edged sword where the companies are interested, they'll go and hire the right people. But the people who are making the voice against the immigration policies, I agree there's a flaw, but because they're not able to, they're like file 20,000, 30,000, but what they do, they supply to the other companies. So I think in my view, there's a different take. I'm sure people don't agree, but in my classroom, I see what, why they're not able to, they apply for the H-1B, but it is getting delayed in the lottery system because they're not directly applying to a company.
Nag had mentioned Davos, and since it just happened last week, what were your insights and observations? What were discussions, about H-1B in Davos?
Well, I don't think there was a lot of discussion about H-1B per se. I think there was a sense of, the conversation was dominated by two themes. One was Trump and the other was AI, and the two were very highly correlated. I guess there was this, towards the end of the week, a realization about the DeepSeek innovation in AI that has caused all the turmoil in the stock market the last few days, and the sense that actually China, with a relatively small team of engineers, was able to sort of free ride on some of the American AI work and build something that was almost as good as ChatGPT, and that maybe the need to go to America to be on the cutting edge of AI isn't quite as strong as it used to be. But I still suspect that if you really want to be on the cutting edge of AI, you still want to go to work in America, and you probably still need an H-1B visa to do that. But certainly there was a concern about the Trump administration and what its policy would be towards all sorts of people that used to be welcome in America and may not be. But I guess the Elon appearing to win the battle with Bannon and others probably reassured people that the H-1B system will continue.
What are you hearing from clients and the shift, from the U.S. and this realignment that's happening geopolitically?
Well, what we're hearing from clients is some disappointment that we're moving towards deglobalization, a sort of a second best world. That means that now we have to take into account other different variables when we talk about globalization. We talk about strengthening our supply chains. We talk about friendshoring and things like that. All those things, again, suggest a second best solution, because if you had original supply chains and they were the most efficient ones, and now all of a sudden you're going to start changing those supply chains to other countries that may have higher costs, may be less efficient, because you feel more comfortable, or because there are some countries that you like or some that you like less. Mm-hmm. Those things are putting you in a second best solution. And the same thing with regard to employment. If all of a sudden now a company needs more workers, and again, we can debate, and Professor Nan has made some really good points. We can debate whether or not the process as it was or is efficient or not. But if there's a shortage of workers, companies just can't produced as much as they would like to, and perhaps not as efficiently as they would like to. So I would love to see markets flow freely when it comes to production. I would like to see markets flow freely when it comes to labor availability or labor supply and labor demand. And those things are moving in the other direction, especially when we all of a sudden start taking these protectionist attitudes. I remember the history books telling us that when we did that, in the 1930s and we had Smoot-Hawley and we put tariffs on over 20,000 commodities, that eventually it led to retaliation and eventually it exacerbated these slowing economic conditions. And probably we can make the argument that it prolonged the depression that occurred in the United States and spread over to other countries. So this is only a small microcosm of that situation. But I think that the more you move away from efficient solutions towards second best solutions, the lower the standard of living. And by the way, studies do show that it also slows global economic growth, which, by the way, is a terrible thing, because when you slow global economic growth, what you do is you increase poverty, you increase starvation. You do a lot of bad things when you slow global economic growth. So I can't be in favor of a policy that moves us in that direction.
What does this look like, across industries and sectors?
The H-1B visa is truly used throughout industries. And what people don't understand, particularly when it gets politicized, is that all of our industries need workers from, high-skilled workers. And so schools have hired teachers, architecture firms have hired architects, mental health counselors, for example, a huge need in our country, particularly after COVID. And of course, the tech workers. And as you just talked about, DeepSeek, think about the people who might have created them. I don't really know any background of DeepSeek, but I'm just going to make some assumptions. It might be that some of the people who are educated in America who couldn't actually stay here went back to China, and they are probably some of the innovators of that. One of the things that Matthew said is that we are educating the best and then we're not letting them stay here. So what is the result? They're going back to India, they're going back to Australia, they're going back to China, they're going to Canada, and they're going to their home countries and being competitive with us. So how does that really serve us? Professor Nag talked about, his students. I've been very, very privileged to have spoken at Columbia University a number of times. I see the talent that goes to Columbia and other schools. All of our schools in America have international students. And there's a circle of love. One of my favorite phrases, circle of love. The schools often will depend on international students for funding. And if the students don't have a pathway to stay here, they may not want to come here. There are two things I want to actually make sure people understand. Whatever happens with the H-1B visa program, and which will unfold in the coming weeks and months and years, the rhetoric alone is damaging for our reputation. Why would somebody want to come to the United States when they're not necessarily feeling welcome at all? And if you add the debate and the executive order that's happening about birthright citizenship, that is also going to be a factor on whether people will actually want to stay here for the rest of their lives, waiting for a carrot of a green card, because the security and stability of their future is really, truly uncertain. Right now, when somebody's in the United States, and Professor Nag and Matthew had both talked about the backlog that we have. The backlog can be for decades. And during that time, people do buy houses, they have children. Children often will age out, which is part of an issue, that make people want to leave America anyway. And so if you put in birthright citizenship, which specifically calls out temporary visa holders, children will not be US citizens, all of this rhetoric will have damage all by itself. So it's going to unfold in a way that people may not want to come to the United States. Now, right now, the American dream is true, but maybe we're taking it for granted.
So what is the responsibility of organizations then? I mean, it's just, it's tough on families, on their employees, on their well-being.
Very much. It's very much an anxious time for everybody. And for anybody who's listening, who doesn't really know the H-1B process, I ask my clients to look at their hands and I say, look at 3 fingers. The first one is the employer. the employer has to file the application. You cannot file it on your own. So somebody has to sponsor you, and you have to prove you are a bona fide business. So you have to provide your business documentation, your tax documentation, your office lease, that there is an actual space for the worker to work at. Then you have to have a very detailed job description, the second finger. The job description has to show that the tasks are actually aligned to a degree, that you need a degree, the theoretical and academic training of a particular degree that allows you to do those itemized duties. And the third prong is, does the employee have the degree necessary? So I, as a lawyer, would not be able to succeed in an H-1B application for a doctor's position. And so all of these things have to align. And if you talk to any tech companies, startups will often be hiring people in Estonia. Why do they do that? It's because they can't find the workers here. And so the people that they have as employees are precious to them. And they want to make sure that they have good, healthy workers who are not bogged down by anxiety, because ultimately it flows through the work and ultimately affects the product that's coming out, that's going to affect the consumers.
Nag, you had mentioned in our earlier conversation about working conditions throughout the decades.
Yes. As I said, I, for one, who benefited or are beneficial coming from India on a H-1B visa, from one of the early, I would call it the smart people, when I got in one of those 65,000 quota, where very few hundreds were applying. The people who left back are not, I don't say they're not smart, but they're not interested at the time because they don't know the lay of the land about the US at the time. But today, with all the opportunities, exploring the new areas of innovation, everyone in my classroom, when I speak to, I, for one, who's Asian American Business Leadership Chairman of the Council here in New York, understand from the demographics and also understand the aspirations of the people. But the working conditions, in my view, needs to be improved a lot, because there needs to be a more transparency, as the attorney was talking about those three things. The pay gap is quite wide for the H-1B employees, and not undermining the American citizen. They're very employable, but because of it's a different demographic, different ideology, or the working conditions, maybe certain jobs, it's a wrong perception saying that the Americans won't do this job. That's why I need to bring people from India or from China or the rest of the world. I think we need to find articulate in the job description, and whoever is the right fit, if you can hire, I think that gives you a right approach in your working conditions, and creating an atmosphere where everybody has been appreciated in the works at the work locations.
The Make in India campaign is underway in India, and the Made in America campaign is underway here in the States. Just returning to your earlier comment, Dr. Chen, you'd mentioned about, there's an interdependence now globally. So can both of these campaigns coexist? Can we, is there a cooperation that's going to happen within the U.S., India relationship?
Well, the answer, Angela, is that yes, they both can coexist as long as both countries agree that they will make in India or make in the United States the products that are the most efficient in the respective countries. If you try to make all countries in all products in India or all products in the United States, that's a strategy that's likely to fail. Again, that's protectionism, whether it's in India or whether it's in the United States. That really doesn't make sense. And it leads to all this fear mongering. For example, even the H-1B visas, we're talking about 85,000 jobs when you look at the fact that in the United States, we have over 160 million jobs. In the mathematical and computer industry, we have about 4.2 million workers. So why should we feel threatened by 85,000 jobs, especially if we're getting the best? We should not want to produce everything in the United States. We should not want to produce everything in India. We should produce only what we can produce at the lowest cost in each of those two respective countries.
Matthew?
Yeah, I would echo that. And I think obviously the political appeal of patriotic consuming and everything is growing at this time when, populist autocrats are winning elections and cementing their power. And so you could understand the appeal to both Trump and Modi of these campaigns. That said, I do think that there are certain factors that are encouraging more movement of manufacture and supply back to countries where they're consumed. So whether that be managing geopolitical risks that have now become clearer in certain supply chains, or the use of local printing, 3D printing and so forth, that allows you to have more proximate manufacturing rather than having to ship stuff from abroad. All those trends are sort of making it easier to run some of these campaigns because they are reflecting an underlying change in the nature of globalization and the way products are made nowadays. But still, Tony's point is completely right. I mean, this is, we're still very far from having a world where people want to be self-sufficient in stuff that it makes no economic sense for them to make. Well, I'd just love to hear, what would be, what people are predicting is going to happen to this debate now. And do we think, I guess predicting Trump's behavior is a fool's game, but what would we like to see happen to H-1Bs over the next 4 years? Do we think a massive expansion could be on the cards, or is it just going to sort of keep rumbling along like it's been doing for the last decade or two?
I think we're all watching with bated breath. But the two things that I will say is President Trump during the campaign trail said that graduates should get green cards. And I've written in The Hill about that. If anybody's interested, read that article. But he also did say that he favors H-1Bs. Now, we do have, which was different from past times, a lot of tech leaders who are supporting this administration, and there are reasons for that. So there is one contingency of it that will look for, high-skilled immigration reform potentially. Now, how that will actually unfold is very difficult to say because you have Stephen Miller on the other side, and we've seen the birthright citizenship issue that will affect H-1Bs as well. But I do think that, number one, I want to just address something that Professor Nag said about wages. Listeners should know that the Department of Labor actually has to approve the wage that the H-1B worker will receive, and it's mandated by the Department of Labor. So an employer can't say, I'm just going to give you, X amount of money. It has to be higher than what the prevailing wage is. So if there is going to be a reform, maybe that has to be a reform. It's not the fault of the employer. They are paying the prevailing wage. And in fact, most of my employer clients will tell you that they pay higher than normal because they are competing for the same talent that Amazon, and I live in Washington State, so they're competing with the Amazons and the Microsofts. So a startup company or a smaller business actually has to pay the same, or if not more, than what an Amazon is actually offering. So there's nothing cheap about this type of worker. And the second thing that people need to understand is we don't have enough of these visas. Anthony mentioned about the openings and the jobs that are available. There are more jobs available than there are workers. So there is no competition, really. And the last thing I will say is the H-1B visa has a they report that for every H-1B worker, there are 4.3 new jobs created for other different types of professions. And that's a very important thing to understand. Somebody who is in the United States will need a doctor, an accountant, and other services. And so there is a multiplier effect, and all of it ultimately helps the economy.
I, for one, very strong believer in the American society and the American the entire policy of last 240 years with the 46 presidents, in my view, U.S. is more resilient in the sense I'm pretty optimistic how things are going to shape. Hopefully, there'll be a mutually beneficial way of policy coming out from the U.S. to the rest of the world, and that everybody is going to benefit out of this new administration.
So I think that over the next couple of years, we will see an expansion of the H-1B visa program. I think that if the prevailing trends continue, that we're going to have deportations, that we're going to slow down immigration, there's going to be a lot greater demand for workers. So I can't imagine how we would be cutting back on the H-1B visa program. I think we will be forced to expand it, and eventually we will also be forced to actually increase immigration and start to discourage deportations. I realize that it's politicized and people talk about deportations with regard to criminals, but deportations with regard to people that have jobs, that if all of a sudden they disappear, that those job openings are going to increase and real GDP starts slowing down. When those things start to happen, we'll realize the importance of immigration and we'll realize the importance of H-1B visas. So I think that over the next couple of years, we will see an expansion of the H-1B visa program.
I think that's a pretty bold note to end on. Everyone seems to be quite optimistic about this, and I do share the last point that I think it's all very well starting to deport some of the most obviously egregious examples of people who shouldn't be in America, but half the construction workers, half the farm workers, all the people doing all the gardening in the Hamptons and in the nice houses of Silicon Valley are all, and there's a lot of illegal immigrants in there who are hardworking people trying to live the American dream, who deserve a better system for being part of the country. And I could see how this issue may go from being one that's very favorable to the current administration to one that's really damaging to it as the 4 years go on.
So thank you, Matthew. So just in conclusion, as we conclude, what are your final thoughts, everyone? What are your recommendations? How do we improve public-private engagement? Tamina?
I think we need immigration reform as a whole. You will likely hear the term merit-based a lot from this administration, but they don't really mean it. But what we need is true immigration reform for all different categories. Businesses don't need just high-tech immigration or high-skilled immigration. They need guest worker programs. Matthew just mentioned about the farm workers and the house workers and the gardeners. The hospitality industry is desperate for help. And if we do have these mass deportations, who will do the work? So we need immigration reform as a whole that benefits the nation for generations to come.
Yes, I would love to see more immigration, especially from the students' point of view, coming to the American education systems, enjoy the benefits of American society and overall academia here. And that translates into a greater economy for whichever the country they're coming from. I think that's a wishful thinking. And hopefully we will be thriving towards bringing more students into the American system.
Dr. Chen?
Yes, and I hear a lot of discussion about a lot of immigrants filling these low-income jobs, and that's true. When my father came from China, he worked as a waiter in a restaurant. My mother immigrated to the United States, and she cleaned office buildings. They both supported me so that I could go to college and eventually get my PhD in economics. But today, it goes beyond that. Today, we have a shortage of nurses. We have a lot of potential people that want to come from countries that have a surplus of nurses, like the Philippines. We have a shortage of doctors in small towns. We have countries that have doctors that can come here. So there are shortages in many areas. In the healthcare system, we have people that are aging and they need healthcare providers, people to stay with them in their houses, some help. So there are a lot of jobs out there that are unfilled. And if we all of a sudden shut down the immigration pipeline, we're not going to be able to grow the economy, and we're going to really start to see a lower standard of living. So over time, the more people that we deport, nothing wrong with deporting the wrong type of people that some people don't have a problem deporting. If you're a criminal and you've done bad things, of course, nobody will argue with that. But people that have legitimate jobs, if you start deporting them, not only will you exacerbate the shortages that we have here, but we also compromise our future standard of living by doing so. And that it can never be a good strategy.
If we look at the immigration system here in the U.S., how do we fare, with other countries?
I mean, it's very hard to say because, if you look at Europe as well, Europe has a similar sort of dysfunctional political debate around immigration. Clearly, at the moment, following Mario Draghi's recent report, there is a growing conversation in Europe about where growth is going to come from, how to sort of get back in the lead on some technologies or catch up on AI and certain things, where you would imagine that in a more sensible world, increased immigration and a European-style H-1B scheme would be the perfect answer. But you're not getting politicians standing up in Europe at the moment and getting elected by calling for more immigration. So I think it's a really very strange moment we're in because of the backlash against globalization and the rise of populism. And if I look at America, I look at the sight of all those big tech leaders at the inauguration lined up behind Trump, and it makes me queasy in all sorts of ways. But I think on this one issue, I'm really rooting for them to have a lot more influence with the president than maybe some of the other people in his cabinet.
Tamina?
If you're a talented, high-skilled worker, I think the world is your oyster. The question is, where do you want to be? Canada has rolled out its carpet for talented workers. They have a startup visa that they took. Their bill was based on our US version, and it's functioning really, really well. Australia recently overhauled its immigration system to have high-skilled immigrants. I think if you are a talented high-skilled worker, the world is your oyster. But the thing is, people want to be in the United States. The resources are here. The companies are here. The American dream truly is something people want to aspire to. They want to reach. But if America closes its doors, I can tell you that people will find their ways in other places, and those places will be better for it.
Thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, see you in the corridor.